really excited about today's talk. A little bit about me, we'll start with that, but very short amount, and then get into kind of saving and saving wisely. That's kind of the main point of what I want everyone to have some good takeaways around. I graduated from Stanford in '04, still live close to campus, just a couple miles away. My office is up in Redwood Shores. Met my wife here, so that was probably one of the cool parts about what I took away from campus. I was in the Mendicants, so I composed a little song about financial. Okay, no, we didn't do that. But yeah, I graduated in '04, worked in consulting in San Francisco for 3 years, and then got into personal financial planning. So that's what my business has been for the last 8 years. And so you can hear about a lot of people who call themselves wealth management advisors. You know, it's like the lifestyles of the rich and famous. I call my clients Henrys. That typically would be the high earnings, not rich yet. So it's a lot of people who are earlier or mid-stage in their careers, working in tech or at law firms, kind of normal people, if you will, but helping them get their finances together where they can have a sense of strategy and heading in the direction for things that are important to them, whether it be buying a house, retiring someday, all those good things. So it was kind of fun to think about today in putting together a talk on saving. That's a pretty broad kind of topic to cover. There's so many different ways you can go. I wanted to think about a simple progression, anchoring some key concepts about saving, and particularly saving early, and the value of doing so. Focusing a bit on behavior. What is one of the interesting things that I've seen throughout all the client meetings that I've done is that the simplest things in finance, almost all of finance, has a bit of kind of common sense to it. If something doesn't look right or doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. It's pretty straightforward math. However, the simple things, the simple mistakes are what people tend to kind of struggle with. So we'll focus a bit on behavior. That's probably the biggest one. How do I build a savings as a habit, not just as something that happens on the side? And then strategies or options. A lot of people in talks that I've done like this before are curious about, hey, what is that one or two cool ideas I can take and implement on my own? I'm leaving plenty of time for Q&A as well if people have some specific questions, but we can talk about some of those strategies that may make sense while you're still in school, starting early, that sort of stuff. So, cool. All right, so savings concepts. So, really in life there's two phases. There's the people at work phase. That's where I show up, go to work, advance my career, earn money, and that's really where I'm paying my bills from, right? I have a paycheck, I take that home. That's the phase that either people are doing some part-time work right now while they're students, or that's waiting for them when they graduate. The idea is if we can save effectively enough over those periods where we're people at work, our money will go to work for us. And so that's retirement. Right? So we have this portfolio, this big chunk of money, which is kind of dauntingly big to think about what to build up to retire someday. That's what we're going to be living off of. And that's what's going to enable us to kind of not have to show up to the workplace when we're 85 and still get a paycheck. This is different than it used to be. What do you think is the biggest correlating factor for happiness in retirement for people who are like our grandparents' age, some of our parents, but not many of them? What do you think is one of those things that makes them happy? Anybody have any thoughts? Yeah, Social Security, that's actually a great point. Yeah, it's going to be clearly different for us. Parlaying off that, it's pensions. So there's not really pensions in the same way there used to be. Stanford employees used to get a pension, but they don't anymore. It's now 401k, investments, all these things. What they've basically done is the companies that used to take care of their employees in retirement are now saying it's up to you. So it's a lot more burden that you have to carry on your own shoulders here. And so it does anchor in the importance of having a good habit about saving early. There's really 3 buckets of money that I like to think of. How do we make things simple? I gotta have my short-term reserve, my money on hand. This is an interesting one. A very common question is, how much money should I have in the bank before I should start thinking about investing, right? So thinking about how much cash is adequate for that. Number 2 is on the midterm. This is all the stuff that could happen between now and, let's say, retirement. So for me, it's going to be like, okay, college education for our 2 kids, that's a big one I'm worried about. Down payment for a house, all those things in the mid-range that are important that you might save and invest towards. And then long-term money being retirement accounts or other money that you plan not to touch for a good long time. So you're going to try to grow that to get some wealth so you can have your money at work instead of you. One other key concept here, timing the market versus time in the market. In my opinion, a lot of the financial industry is designed to try to talk to you about how they get a return above the market, or they have these strategies, some secret sauce that you can't get elsewhere, right? And a lot of that relies on trying to like, oh, today I'm going to buy Google, and then I'm going to sell it tomorrow, and I'm going to flip it into GoPro, and then GoPro had its run, so I'm going to go to Tesla. These kinds of strategies are what get talked about a lot. You turn on the news, and that's what you see as well. Time in the market is far more important. And what I mean by that is the longer your time horizon, you do not have to be a guru in finance to build wealth over the long run. The biggest advantage is how long you have until you're going to touch your money. And guess what? Everyone in the room has a huge advantage there. Because a lot of this long-term money in particular, you can wait a few decades before you're going to touch it. So good. So anchoring this concept a little further, let's say you had two scenarios. Investor A, this is a 20-year period. So starting in 95, they put $2,000 a year for 10 years into an investment account. So from 95 to 2005, that's what they did. And then they stopped, and they let it grow until 2015. Investor B says, those first 10 years, I'm gonna have more fun. I don't really wanna save that $2,000, but when I'm earning more, starting from 2005 to 2015, I'm gonna tuck away that $2,000 a year. So they save the same amount of money, but over that 20-year time period, investor A ends up with double the money at the end. So we've heard this idea of compounding interest before. It's kind of fun to just look at, okay, even if I start small, even really small, almost laughably small, you're still better off than waiting till later, even if you save 2 or 3 times as much. So I think that's a key concept that we'll go over. Rule of 72, this is how you can look really smart if you want to impress someone with how long will it take your money to double. So you take 72 and you divide whatever interest rate you think you can get into the 72, and that's how many years it takes. So if I'm getting a 3% return on a bond that my grandma gives me, right, a government bond or something like that, it actually takes 24 years for that money to double. By the same token, if I'm in a high-risk stock or something like that getting 12% per year, it would only take 6 years to double. This also applies to credit cards. So if you think about high-interest debt, let's say I owe 20% on my credit card and I have to be paying that interest. This is why people get into holes that they have trouble climbing out of. Because if I'm paying 20% interest, it might take 3.5 years for my money to double in terms of what I owe. So that's hard, right, to dig yourself out of. So when you think of staying ahead, getting a habit of saving early and avoiding those debt scenarios is a good approach. And then what a difference 2% can make. A lot of times you hear from the investment industry, oh, we'll charge 1 or 2% to manage your money, right? You want to look at what you're getting for that. You also want to look at the types of vehicles you're in, because 1% may not sound like a lot, but it changes a huge amount in terms of what the money ends up being, especially over a long time period. So finding ways to understand what expenses you're paying, that's another piece. But it also means when you're looking at retirement, you don't want to put all your money in a savings account because it's not going to grow enough. Right? You're going to want to find some higher return options, even if it means your money might be more volatile along the way. You want to emphasize the higher the rate of return, even if it's a small difference, it's going to make a big difference in your retirement picture. All right, so that's kind of the simple stuff. Let's get into some behavior. So starting small makes a difference. We talked about compounding interest and that concept. So here's my theory about budgeting. Who here has actually done a budget and sticks to it? I'm always impressed. That was like a third of the room. That was pretty good. I really don't like doing that process all the time. It feels like I'm kind of looking at myself in the mirror and criticizing my spending all the time. It's very mentally heavy as a task for me. What I would recommend is doing a budget. There's then the question of what next, right? If you can list out your key expenses you know you need to make, what I find to be the biggest advantage is it'll tell you what you should hypothetically be able to save. So if you know what you're hypothetically able to save, take some smaller number than that, because there's all this unforeseen stuff that probably is in your budget that's hard to list out, right? So take a smaller number than that and automate it on the front end. Save first and spend second. So what I mean by that is I often feel cash poor because at the end of every month, we look like we're just skating by on our checking account. But that's because I know I'm so busy, I'm not going to be great at coming back and revisiting a budget and consciously saving. I'm automating that stuff so that it gets out of sight, out of mind, out of the way, in a place that I don't see it. So we'll get over some of those ideas as well. But it's like, that's, in my opinion, I think that's the easiest way to trick your brain into doing it the right way. And then you end up spending less. My little story here was, so in that first 3 years, I was living in San Francisco, in a 3-bedroom apartment where I was paying $625 a month, so that was pretty sick. That was pretty good. I should have kept that on rent control or something. So that was really good, but I was making 50 grand a year as a consultant, and that 50 grand a year, I felt like the richest guy in town. Like, I mean, I had never had a paycheck like that ever in my life. I mean, that was like 3 grand a month that I had no idea what to do with, right? So I was like, I can just have that forever, I'm good to go. So what was interesting is I'm a very generous person, I found out. Over the first year, I didn't pay attention to money at all, and I'd saved by default a few $100 in the bank or something like that. The next year, I said, okay, I gotta get serious about this. So I started automating savings and scooping out $500 a paycheck. So every paycheck, $500 would go aside. I never missed the money. What I realized is my friends told me I just wasn't buying drinks as often as I used to. So I apparently single-handedly supported the bar scene in San Francisco for like 2 or 3 years. Luckily reined that in. But what was funny is I couldn't believe that $500 a paycheck, so that's $1,000 a month on that kind of income, actually was doable. And it didn't even feel painful if I just never saw it. I just had to get it out of there. Okay, so kind of clarifying your savings goals is a big part of this as well. So once you start saving the money, where do you want to put it? If you're going to try to buy a house in a year, putting it inside a retirement plan may not be the best place, right? If you don't have any cash in the bank, you may not want to put all your money in the stock market because you're going to need an emergency cushion, right? So get some clarity around what your goals are of what you're saving towards, and you might have that $100 a month you set aside, and it may go to a couple different places accordingly. And then automating, we already talked about that one. Avoiding budget pitfalls, this is coming back to that budgeting. One of the things I don't like about budgeting is this listed items undercalculated. You list it all out and you're like, wow, this says that I spend 8 grand a month, but really, I feel like I spend 11. Where's that 3? I hear that from clients all the time. And you're like, how do you miss $3,000? It's a weird, it's like this mental trap, these one-offs, these impulse purchases, bills that come up once a year, like I pay my car insurance every December. God, I hate getting that bill. It's like a couple grand, I'm like, ugh. But then the rest of the year, I'm like, oh, so easy, I already have it. And then emergencies that come up, the unexpected. All right, so behaviorally, before we get into this, one of these phrases I just heard that I really like. So does anyone know what the phrase alpha is when it refers to finance? Has anyone heard that before? It's great, it feels real technical. So alpha and beta. Beta is a measure of risk. Alpha is the measure of performance above a benchmark. So a common benchmark that you'll hear is, the S&P 500. So a lot of companies will say, if we invest your money for you, we'll get you alpha. We'll do better, we outperform the S&P 500. So what I think is interesting is that's what a lot of finance is kind of trying to get people to think about is how do I outperform? What I think is the most important takeaway, if you take away nothing else from this, behavioral alpha is where it's at. And what I mean by that is it's not about necessarily what you're saving into. How are you getting your behavior to outperform what you would do left to your own devices? So that's where you try to trick your brain into saving. Automate on the front end, save first, spend second. I know that sounds simplistic. I might come to a talk like this and be like, God, did you really just tell me that? But that is the secret sauce. That's all you have to do is get a habit around saving. Then steering it to the right direction becomes much easier. I love it. I sometimes have clients who say, I'll get in there, and it's like 25-year-old, and they say, gosh, I just realized, Chris, I wanted to meet with someone. I asked a coworker about you because I've got a good chunk of money in the bank, and I just need to figure out what to do. I'm like, okay, what do you have in the bank? They're like, $500. So I'm curious, what do I do next? I'm like, what's your rent? It's like 3 grand a month. Okay. We need some more cash, and then 6 months from now, we can have a conversation. This is good. On the flip side, someone says, gosh, I feel like I just can't get ahead. My husband and I have been saving. we're nervous about the markets, but we don't even know when we're going to have enough in the bank. We just know we need to plow it away. And I say, great, what's in the bank? We have $200,000, and that's a much easier client to help, right? Because we already have the habits in place, and we already have something to work with. So make sure you're in B, not A. All right, so what's the right fit for each bucket? So short-term savings. Use a checking account for those monthly expenses that kind of, ideally this checking account should float with a few $100 extra in it, but otherwise get close to zero every month. Because you're training your brain that this is the mental place where I don't buy that extra drink, or I don't take that impromptu trip. I can't afford to do something. You need your brain to have those moments where you choose not to do something. And so the checking account will help you do that if you can keep a low enough balance in there. The rest of your money, I would recommend a higher yield savings account. Does anyone already have one of these set up? Or they've done this? Maybe not. If you go to like Wells Fargo, a lot of those things, and I'm not bashing on any banks, I use Wells Fargo, but their savings accounts, I was like, oh man, we had a good amount in savings. Where's my tax form that shows me all the interest that I earned over the year? And I looked online, I couldn't find it, so I talked to my banker, and he's like, oh yeah, we aren't paying enough interest for you to have anything. I was like, are you kidding me? I had like thousands of dollars in there, and I didn't get anything. So double check what your interest rate is. That's an important one. For your out of sight, out of mind savings, that's what you want to make sure you're getting something. Right now, 1% is awesome. So that's kind of sad, but it's true. 1% is awesome. 0.75, still real good. Typical banks that are just a normal checking or savings are going to pay you 0.01%, which is basically zero. Yeah.
Where can you find those types of savings accounts?
Excellent question. I would like to add the disclaimer, I do not get compensated for any of this stuff in terms of recommendations. Clients have told me they've had good experiences, and what I've seen online, online savings accounts I find to be one of the great ways to do it. One thing I like about it is you can set it up separate from your checking account, and you can set up automatic deposits from your checking into that online savings account you have to go into separately to go see. So you kind of pretend that you don't have the money. Different ones online, Ally Bank, A-L-L-Y, has a 1% rate that I've seen recently. HSBC and the one that I did back in the day was ING, which got bought out by Capital One. It's now Capital One 360. She and Co, who came and did this talk a little while ago, there's resources online. She works for this company called NerdWallet. NerdWallet has some really good stuff where you can compare savings rates. Remember, yes, the rate of return is important. Saving the money is more important. So behaviorally setting it up, even if it's at Wells Fargo, getting it out of sight where you don't see it, that's an important step. So find a way to automate it. But hopefully that's helpful for a couple of those. And good rule of thumb, if you can get close to 1%, you're doing well in this bucket. By the way, so once again, back in 2004, 2005, I was getting 5.5% on savings back then. That was cool. Because like that first time I saved 10 grand in the bank, I was making $500 a year, and I was like, yeah. Okay, it's good. Okay, so online savings accounts, great. Long-term savings. So sometimes, most of the time not so much, but sometimes when you have employment, they're going to give you the option for a 401k or other retirement plan. The big one to remember here is don't miss out on free money. There's usually some sort of match for a lot of employers where if you give $1, they'll give you 50 cents. Or if you give $1, they'll give 25 cents. Don't miss out on those opportunities. So that will be, and when you first get to your first full-time role, for those of you who are undergrads right now and haven't graduated yet, make sure you don't miss out on the free money there. The other one, so that's an employer plan. The other kind of plans are individual retirement plans, also known as IRAs. There's a couple flavors of these, traditional and Roth, and they work differently from a tax perspective. So, what do you think a normal person pays in taxes? I know a lot often is what people say. Do you have any percentages in mind? Yeah, go ahead.
20?
Great, 20 to 30%? Depends on the state you live in. So, 20%, if you were making that 50K job right out of school, you're probably not paying too much more than 20% at the end of the day, your overall tax rate. But what you see that is when you get those paychecks, right? So you get a paycheck and you think you're earning $4 grand a month, but it's not really $4 grand, it's $2,800, or it's $3 grand when it comes to you. that's an important thought is, wouldn't it be nice if I could have money coming to me tax-free? Or if I'm paying taxes, how do I pay the lowest rate possible as opposed to a higher rate? So the reason I bring this up is to illustrate the point of the Roth IRA. For most people in this room, this might be the lowest amount of money you'll ever earn. We hope. It's probably a negative cash flow every year right now with tuition and everything else, right? So that's what we hope. So your tax rate is actually going to be very, very, very low. Which means if you can stuff money, even a small amount, into places where it'll never get taxed again, that's pretty cool. And a Roth IRA is exactly that. So you can take money right now that you haven't paid much tax at all, because you don't make very much. They charge you more on taxes the more you make. So if you're not making much right now, a Roth IRA is a great way to save money, where it'll grow, you have choices to invest it, you'll pull it out after age 59 and a half in most cases, and it'll be tax-free. So how much would I love to have 100 grand tax-free as opposed to 100 grand taxable? That sounds really good. Does that kind of make sense? People have probably heard of Roth, some of them, maybe? Good, okay. Who has a Roth? I always like asked that one. God, you guys are already at a cutting edge. The maximum you can give is $5,500 for this year. They ratcheted it up a little bit every year. So the most you'd be able to do is a little less than $500 a month. A lot of people that I've talked to, when they have a summer job, if they're going to make more money than they're used to making for 3 months, and then they have the dry spell for 9 months, right? If you can front load a little bit of that, even a grand or two into a Roth, you can do a good job. And for the question that you might ask on this as well, there are so many places you can open up a Roth IRA. There's really good tools online right now about this as well, of finding low-cost platforms where you can put the money in and just get it in there and get it going. Vanguard is kind of one of the big go-tos that you'll find. You can get some guidance from an individual at a bank or an advisor if you want to get some additional help there. But there's other companies that have really tried to chisel away at that. So Wealthfront and Betterment are two companies that also have tried to help people start to save and invest. Here's the downside. For those ones where there's no advisor or no fees to put in the money, they may require a higher minimum to start. So you may have to start with a few grand. But if you save in cash first, you're good to go. Okay, Roth IRA. So then midterm savings, that's where we get to the stuff that you kind of see a lot of commercials about, I would think. It's kind of mutual funds or index funds, ETFs, stocks, bonds. This portion would be, if you get a job at Apple, they say, here's a whole bunch of Apple stock, and over the next 4 years, if you stay here, you vest it out, and we'll give it to you. That's what a lot of people end up with in this kind of midterm savings bucket. So then the choice is, what do I keep invested? What do I diversify? What do I steer towards the long-term bucket? What do I move towards the short-term bucket? So there is some decision-making along the way here, but what I would say is the order of operations: get your emergency cushion in cash. A good number, and it is a little daunting, but 3 to 6 months of expenses is the baseline. So whatever you need to make your life work on a monthly basis, keep the roof over your head, feed yourself, all those good things, that times 3 or times 6, somewhere in there, is probably what you should aim to have in the bank. Then you can start to think about some of this midterm investing stuff. The long-term investing, the problem is when you put money into these accounts, you're investing it typically. And if you need to pull the money back out, the Roth IRA actually has some pretty good rules about accessing the money if you have to, but it is invested in the market. And so if you had your nest egg and you invested it in 07 because life looked really good, and then you had to pull out your money in 08 because you had an emergency, that would not look so good. You'd have half as much money as what you thought. So just be careful. Investing is going to be more volatile. Make sure you have that cash cushion so you can weather those storms and sell when it's up, not when it's down. Cool. So those are some of the key concepts I wanted to go over. To summarize very briefly, behavioral alpha, that's one of those phrases to think about. How am I going to steer my behavior to help me save by habit so that my default situation is to set aside money, even if it's small? And then the next step being, where do I put it? Short-term bucket, build up that reserve. Roth IRA also being something pretty smart to think about, I would think, at this stage in life in general for the folks in this room.